live from a meeting of the Send Institute. It's partnership with Wheaton College Billy Graham Center and the North American Mission Board. We're here with our North American Missiologists Council, been having discussions all morning about mission and ministry. Excited, we'll be sharing some of those at the upcoming Exponential conferences as well. So again, my name is Ed Stetzer. I lead the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College. I have two guests today, We normally have one, but today we have two. So because we have two, we'll have even double the fun. Anyway, first guest is going to be Andy Wood. Andy's the lead pastor of Echo.Church. He and his wife, Stacy, started South Bay Church 2009 with two other families, and they've actually been there, obviously, since then. It's actually become one of the fastest growing churches in the most unreached area of the United States, now reaching over 2,300 people in 3 locations in Silicon Valley, which I would tell you is really kind of a freakish response, and just excited to hear. And he's passions to create environments that engage unchurched people in the Bay Area. Along with leading the church, he enjoys investing time helping church planners, church leaders think more innovatively and more. They founded an organization called Frontline Coaching. Also with us is Steve Stroope. Steve's the pastor of Lake Point Church. Lake Point Church is in Rockwall, Texas, called to pastor shortly after its founding. Church attendance under his leadership has grown from 53 to over 15,000 today. They planted 38 churches. The bio I have says 25, but it's actually 38. That's how many more churches they have been planting in areas like Boston, Montreal, New York, Portland, San Francisco. Actually, their combined attendance is larger than that of Lake Point. He does coaching for them and others. Steve's spiritual gifts are in evangelism, leadership, and teaching. I love his passion for reaching unchurched people. We've been friends for a while, and he's actually a strong supporter, for example, of discipleship in small groups as well. He's got a real heart for the local church as well, so I'm deeply thankful for him. The webinar today, the topic today, is going to be around permission giving. Now, if you recall, we had 5 essential practices of hero making. We've been talking about Dave Ferguson and Warren Bird's book, Hero Maker, 5 Essential Practices for Leaders to Multiply Leaders, right? So we've talked about multiplication thinking, a shift in thinking, permission giving, a shift in seeing, disciple multiplying, a shift in sharing, gift activating, a shift in blessing, and kingdom building, a shift in counting. Today, we're going to look at permission giving, which is key, finding gifts in others, right? I see in you the potential to leave a movement and help raise up new leaders and more. Now, again, these will be part of what these gentlemen are actually speaking at upcoming Exponential conferences as well. Brooks, I think you have the graphic. Let's go ahead and put up the graphic of some of the places that people can connect. Steve, you'll actually be a speaker at Exponential in Houston, October 24th and 25th. Andy, you'll be at the Bay Area Exponential region as well. And so let's jump right in and we'll start with you, Steve. We're having some technical difficulties on that graphic, but if we get it, we'll be able to pull it up a little bit later on. No worries there. Steve, you're going to be speaking there at Exponential and October 24th, 25th in Houston. What key point are you going to want leaders to hear during your message at that regional event?
Yeah, well, just really to have the kingdom mindset and not just think about building your own local church in your own city, but how can you help make disciples and be a part of what God's doing in a movement around the world?
Yeah, now, and let's go to Andy. Andy, you as well. Andy, you're going to be doing this at the Bay Area Exponential Regional, which is actually just a few days before the Houston one. What big idea are you going to be bringing to that conference there?
Yeah, we're very excited to be able to be a part of that. And, being on the West Coast, San Francisco Bay Area is, at this point, the most unchurched or unreached area in all of the United States. And so I think one of the beauties of the hero-making message is just the reality that we as followers of Jesus can have, like Steve said, that kingdom-mindedness and really give permission to others to continue to plant churches. I think that there's a beauty of what Exponential is doing, really to lift the vision to start more churches in the unreached areas. So we're believing that God's going to inspire some new church planters and really pour into those that are already going and give them some encouragement as well.
Love it. And I love the diverse settings. You mentioned, you're quoting statistics, and most people don't quote statistics in front of me, but I actually agree with those that, the Bay Area is remarkably unchurched. But Steve, you're in a different area. You're kind of in a Dallas area as well. These are different kind of cultures and environments. So let's talk first about how you ended up where you are. I'll throw it to either of you. Who are your hero makers in your life who kind of worked in your life, empowered you, gave you an opportunity and more. So let's start with you, Andy, because you just spoke a little bit. Talk to us about some of the hero makers in your life.
Yeah. So I started sensing God's calling when I was in high school. I played football and I was a wrestler. And most of the guys on my team, they weren't followers of Jesus. And one of the things that started for me really quickly after following Jesus was just this passion to get the message to all of my friends. And that was kind of a combo of every time I'm in conversations with these guys, I'm trying to bring up Jesus somehow. And then kind of as I moved forward, started thinking about bringing all these guys to church with me. I went to this really traditional liturgical church and was really embarrassed to take my friends to church with me. So I prayed and I said, God, if you'd ever use me to start a church to reach people like my friends, I want to do that. And at that point, I had no idea what that meant. It was just really a dream. So I took that dream to my youth pastor. His name is Mike Bonzer. And I shared it with Mike. And it was really amazing because after that, Mike really started taking me under his wing. And he started teaching me really everything he knew about ministry, pouring into me, and God used that relationship to give me a vision, to equip me and empower me. Moving forward, there were a couple other really instrumental people. I went away to college. Actually, that's where I got connected into more kind of the North American mission, the SEND network. And I went to a local church there. They had a student ministry, and I just started serving in the student ministry. And I went to the guy who was in charge, and I said, hey, I think if you'd let me take the middle school students, I could take them and start a middle school ministry. And he basically gave me permission. I had like no experience in ministry, but this guy, Eric, said, hey, why don't you take the student ministry, the middle school ministry, and run with it? So there was him. John Worcester was another guy. You guys probably have heard of him before. He's like a modern day Apostle Paul. And then most recently, Steve Stroope has just poured into my life a ton. And helped us once we had that vision to start Echo Church, and just came alongside and invested in us. So there've been a lot of people along the way that God has used.
Nice. Steve, let's go to you as well. I'd like to hear a little bit about the people who spoke into your life and how that impacted you.
Yeah, I had the same experience when I was in the 8th grade. I went to a camp and I got a burden for my friends at school. And I shared that with my local pastor. His name was Dr. Garrett. We used to call him Dr. G. And Dr. G said, well, great, I want to get you and some other guys in the church together and start teaching you how to study the Bible. And he did that for a while. And then he said, I want to teach you how to give a devotional. And so he had several months where he taught us how to exegete a passage. We didn't know that was called that at that time. And the next thing I know, he had me scheduled as a 9th grader to preach on a Sunday night at our church. And so there I was standing up in front of about 700 people and preaching as a 9th grader. That next summer, there was a guy by the name of Bob Dixon who invited me and several of my friends to go up to Minnesota and do vacation Bible schools for the entire summer. And so we had 10 weeks of vacation Bible school that we're supposed to do. In the church we were staying in, they lost their pastor. And they came to me and they said, we're looking for someone to fill in until we can find another pastor. We understand that you preached at your home church. And I said, well, yes, I did. And they said, well, would you preach for us next Sunday? So here I'm my 10th grader. And I'm preaching, and they don't find anybody all summer long. I ended up preaching Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night for the first summer as a summer missionary, 30 times as a 10th grade student. And all those people, I guess they didn't have a whole lot of options at the time, but they gave me permission to develop my preaching skills and to make mistakes and all the other things you do when you are just beginning.
Nice. I want to remind you if you're watching on Facebook Live, we actually can't see your questions, though you can certainly engage in there. I want to encourage, if you're watching Facebook via Facebook Live right now, to go ahead and watch, continue to watch, but like and share so that other people can kind of engage with this free resource as well. This is a ministry of Exponential. We're happy to be able to do that as well. In just a moment, I'll give you instructions on how to submit questions as well. We're working through some technical things related to that, so we should get there pretty soon. But let's talk a little bit about permission giving. Let's go right back to you, Steve, because you just chatted. So the Exponential is talking about the 5 essential practices of hero making. One of them's permission giving. And so that's maybe not as clear as some of the others. So what does it mean to be a permission giver? And are there some ways you've sought to do that?
Yeah. Back in the 1980s, I read a great article by Brad Smith, who used to be the CEO of Leadership Network. Now he is the president of the Bakke Institute or Bakke University. And he talked about delegation. How do you delegate to someone? And he used the illustration, which I want to just talk about. He talked about taking a box, and what you do is when you give somebody permission, you say, that's your box. And you can do anything you want in there as long as you don't violate the sides of the box. And he suggested that one side of the box might be a budget. Another side of the box might be theology, the theology of your organization. Another side of the box might be visions, the vision of the church or the vision of the organization. Another side might be values. And as long as you stay in that box, you're free to operate. And I think permission giving is taking the box, whatever responsibility that you have as a minister or as a layperson, and giving a piece of it to someone else and saying, here's a right size box based on what I've seen, and entrusting into them permission to operate in that box as long as they don't violate the boundaries of that box. And so it provides guardrails for them, but it also gives them a lot of freedom.
Good words. Andy, what would you add to that? What would you nuance differently? Talk to us about how you see permission giving and how that's being lived out.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything Steve said. So I'm just adding and pretty much everything I know Steve's taught me. So
he's taught you everything you know, but not everything he knows. Just keep that in mind.
That's why I still ask him questions.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's why if we can actually look behind Steve, one thing he could teach us is what it's like to actually have a cassette recorder still. I mean, it's pretty amazing that actually. So do you have cassettes? I mean, do you actually play cassettes in there? How's that work?
Well, how do I listen to the sermons that I first preach if I don't have a cassette player?
Well, fair enough. I was thinking 8-track, but nevertheless, let's move on from there and go to Andy's question. Andy, what about permission giving?
Yeah, I think a lot about this story with Barnabas and Paul, and how, after Paul came to faith and had his experience on the Damascus Road, how Barnabas opened doors for him. And I think a lot of what a permission giver is doing is they're opening doors for the person that they're empowering. Like so when I look back on our ministry, I think about some of it is wisdom, some of it's resources, some of it is just believing in a leader that is coming along behind us and just saying, I see this in you, which I know that's a part of what Dave talks about. But I think about, like, for us as a church, for example, right now, we're sitting in a building we've been in now for 6 years. And when we first had the vision after starting the church to kind of move forward to get into a facility, Steve took probably 3 or 4 trips out to the Bay Area, looking at buildings, helping us come up with drawings and brainstorm. Then he kind of helped us with the idea of how do we get the resources. All of that is equipping and empowering, but it's also a form of permission giving to say, okay, there's some barriers that stand in the way of you moving forward in the kingdom. And as much as I know and the resources I have as a leader, I'm going to do my best to remove some of those lids to empower you as a leader. So
I like it. So what about, you've got a case study in that you and Steve have this journey, this relationship. He gave you permission not just to plant a church out of Lake Point Church, but more. Talk to us a little bit about what that looked like for you and for Steve in your relationship.
Yeah, I think some of it is, initially Lake Point was the first church to partner with us. And we talk a lot about this whenever we're putting together resources and a team for a church plant, that your partner churches are like the anchor stores in a mall, that when you get key partners that stand with you, other people will join. So Steve, I think, opened the door relationally for a lot of other churches when Lake Point said, hey, we believe in this guy. We've vetted him. We've taken him through our interview process. We believe they're going to plant a great church. You should come alongside as well. So I think that's one side of it. Coaching is another side of it. So over the last 10 years now, we've probably had, literally hundreds and hundreds of coaching conversations. And then I think there also is a resource component of it, but I think that's secondary to the wisdom that a leader gives in the process of giving permission.
It's a good word. It's a good word. So Steve, let's talk about this, because again, with Andy, you've walked this journey, but it is funny, again, from your bio, 25 to 38 is kind of a jump and a leap. So you're obviously sending out some people. How are you doing that?
Yeah, we just really feel like God has called us to help start churches in spiritually under-resourced areas in the United States. And I'm not against starting churches anywhere else. We just feel called specifically to those really tough places. And here's what we found out is that it takes a lot of money to start churches in places like New York City and Boston and San Francisco. And so we can't do that by ourselves. And so a part of what we believe God's called us to do is to pull together, as Andy was talking about, to open some doors by pulling together a group of churches that would sponsor a church in some of those higher expense areas where they need a strong start. And so we kind of see ourselves like a spiritual hedge fund. And what we do is we say to people, here's someone we vetted very carefully. How about joining around the table with us? And in all 38 of those starts, we've had different people around the table. We have obviously multiple involvements by some people, but usually we bring people, the church planter brings people, other people who've invested with us before also bring people around that table. And again, they bring not only their financial resources, they bring, they sit at the wisdom chair, they send teams, appropriate teams that are actually going to help the church plant rather than hurt them. And we found that this works really well. Now, obviously, when you invest the kind of money that we're investing in some of these church plants and spend the time that you're spending, you need to be careful to make sure there's a match between the gift and the culture of the church planter and the area that they're involved in. But it's always a risk when you give someone permission.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to talk a little bit about that. Let me remind everyone, you are watching we call it Exponential Backstage. Obviously, we're not doing these literally at the conference, but we are leading to the conferences. Steve will be in Houston, October 24th and 25th. Andy will be at the Bay Area Regional, October 22nd and 23rd. Let me also mention that we are having some technology challenges. And so if you want to ask questions, you need to do it through Zoom. If you're watching and joining us via Zoom, the chat place for you to leave some questions, and I'm happy to pass those on to our panelists here today. Important conversations going on. I'm interested in going a little deeper, if I could, because you have a relationship, and even before we came on camera, you guys were sort of joking about when you sort of told them slow down or things of that sort. How do you, start with Steve, I want to ask, how do you speak into, I don't know how to say this, Steve, but you're older than Andy, a little bit, and so how do you as a person who's older than Andy, how do you speak into younger leaders in ways that's beyond just the here's how you plant, but here's how I'm up in your life to try to make a difference for you, your family, your relationship with the Lord, and more?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is that we've never had a model that whenever we're planning a church, we say to someone like Andy, you have to do church just like we're doing church. What's obvious is that Andy has got to be himself, number one. Number two is he's in a cultural context that's different than the Bible Belt where I planted a church. And so I've got to give him a measure of freedom. And so when I come and I speak into him, I'm not speaking into him about the grassroots stuff, about, the color of their brochure or the name of their church or how they do small groups, because he's got to have freedom to do that. But there are some things that are principles that I want to speak into him. And very frankly, a good coach is asking more questions than he is giving advice. I'm saying, how are you doing small groups? And then I'm asking, how's that working? And then I'm asking, why are you still doing it that way if it's not working? And then what I might do is I might network him with other people who have done small groups well in that same region of the country. And so it's not so much about me speaking into his life, although that happens some, as it is connecting him to other people who know a lot more than I do to speak into issues that are universal in terms of strategy or principles of doing ministry.
Andy, what would you say to that? Is he just making all this up, or is there truth to it?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of Steve's phrases that he used often is, you'd be stupid if I do everything I told you to do. And so I think that, part of the relationship is that Steve is very wise. In fact, I'd say he's probably one of the wisest people I know. And whenever he has a strong opinion about something, I better listen to why he sees it the way he does. What I've learned over time is, most high D or strong leaders, they're going to be pretty clear and direct. So when I'm getting feedback or coaching from Steve, if he gives me feedback, it's always real clear. So I've learned to ask him, like, okay, based on a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly do you feel about this issue? And then that gives me a sense of, okay, this is like a 10, this is a 5. And then I want to ask questions of him to try to get behind his advice and counsel to understand the principle of what he says. So I would say there's a give and take in the relationship. The mentee or the person that's being apprenticed has to look at somebody that's investing in them to say, what are they good at? What questions can I ask? So that way, when we're in the conversation, the time is maximized and focused. But then Steve, being like he is, gives the wisdom and then kind of lays off to say, okay, one of his other phrases, you're the man on the ground, you make the final call. And so what that does is it kind of liberates the person to say, okay, I trust that you have wisdom as well, and you see things I don't see from my perspective, but I also want to help you make the best decision possible.
That's good.
So it's a give and take.
I like that. So as your church has grown, Andy, of course, Steve, you're already pastoring I guess a giga church is the new hip term that the cool kids use when it's over 10,000. You're pastoring a mega church, Andy. One of the questions from Mark Lucinius, I'm hoping I got that right. What principles do you teach those pastoring new churches about how to aggressively to pursue new staff, new plants, new space? What principles to guide those decision making? So you're sort of past that stage, Andy, but what suggestions would you say for church planners? Most people watching them are not pastoring a mega church. Most people watching are starting a new church. When do they add staff, and how do you decide?
Okay, so there were about 5 questions in there. I'll start with, part of it is wrestling through what grows a church and then what sustains the growth as it happens. And obviously we believe, from a biblical standpoint, God's the one that grows the church. He's the one that adds to the kingdom. And then we cooperate with him. We ride the waves that he's making. When you look at just practically what causes a church to grow, really at the end of the day, are we focused on reaching people who are far from God, evangelism, and are we growing the people that are coming through our doors, discipleship? I mean, it's just really that basic. So the question of staffing your church for growth really is, as the church is growing, how do you structure it to continue to cooperate with what God is doing? So from our experience, it looks different at every level. So when you're starting, you have 100 people, 250, 500, 1,000, they're all different. The principle is, how are you wired as a leader? So what are you great at? And then finding the people around you to support what you're not good at. When you start a church, there are several positions that you really need to make sure that you have covered, but there's a lot of different ways you can slice it. So you're looking at having somebody who's good at teaching. The model that we use, we want to have somebody who's great with music or worship. We want to have somebody that's great with family ministry or kids. And then for us, we put a lot of value on our guest experience. So trying to figure out those positions are important. But the principle, I would say, is some of those things you might be good at, and then you can find people who are good at the things that you're not good at. I can elaborate more, but that kind of gets the staffing conversation rolling.
No, I think it's helpful. Let me switch over to another question that we have coming in from Pastor Joe Bell. I don't know. I know what denomination Steve's affiliated with. I don't know if you're denominational or non-denominational. I guess you said Send Network. So without getting into denominational specifics, Steve, because people will be watching from all different traditions, Joe's question is, how do you take a new minister, you're mentoring Andy or others, and help them learn the culture of your denomination, walk through that, still have the freedom to do what God calls them to do? But if you could answer in a way that's going to be applicable to people in the CRC and the PCA and the ELCA and whatever other acronyms are out there as well. What do you think?
Yeah, here's the thing that we are committed to do. We're committed to make disciples. And a little bit about understanding what it means to have a kingdom mindset is to think a little bit out of your tribe. And that's why not all the churches that we have planted have come out of the Southern Baptist tradition. Andy happened to be in that tribe, but we also are planting churches with folks who come out of the Methodist tribe, some who come out of the Christian church tribe, several who come out of the Bible church tribe. And so a part of it for us is whenever we look for a church planner, we're looking for doctrinal affinity. That's important to us. We're looking for paradigm affinity, which means that this is a person who's willing to do just about anything that they can do to plant a church that's not nailed down in Scripture. In other words, everything else is up for grabs, being effective more than being traditional. And so I'm not really looking to mentor somebody in the ways of my denomination. I'm actually looking to mentor them on ways outside of our denomination. In other words, if it's not nailed down, what freedom do we have? And to me, it's more important to have that kingdom mindset and to ask questions about what's most effective versus what's going to line up with their denomination.
Yeah, no. So, Joe, I think what he's saying is he didn't like your question, but just a little bit more on that question, Steve. So, do you ever say, you talk about that box? Is part of that box? I'm just trying to reflect Joe's question. Is part of that box? Here's where our denomination is on certain things, and walk in that setting, or how does that work?
For us, no, it's not.
Okay, fair enough. Helpful.
It's the side of the box, and by the way, that box can be a box, it can be a triangle, it can be an octagon. It depends on how many restraints that you have, but ours is conservative evangelical.
Okay.
And that really is what I'm concerned about, because I think that we got to be willing to think outside of the box, to coin a phrase, in terms of denominations, and that the sides of the box being denomination has limited us in fulfilling the Great Commission sometimes.
Fair enough. I do like the octagon a little better. It reminds me of the Chuck Norris film, 1980. My denomination feels sometimes like an octagon. But anyway, that's another story for another day. So,
Ed, can I say something on that from a church?
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that there's two sides of the equation for a church planter. One side would be the perceived boundaries, and then the other would be the stated boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times, I think as a church planter, I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago who's thinking about planting with a certain denomination, and they have all these perceptions about what the denomination says that they can't do. And so I asked the question, well, how are you certain that that's what your denomination says that you can't do? And they're like,
yeah,
I kind of have heard through the grapevine that's what the denomination does. And I think that it's important to drill down into that, to say, okay, what are the actual covenants that a denomination is going to ask me to sign if I'm going to plant a church with them? And most of the time, at the end of the day, your denomination wants the same thing you do. They want to plant churches that are going to reach people who are far from God and grow disciples. And so if you can work through the nitty gritty to find if it's perceived or stated in the boundary, I think it makes the relationship a lot more clear.
Nice. Okay, we got a question came in from Bob Ingalls. Bob asked the question, we're going to find a coach if my tribe doesn't offer one. He is into a new church plant. He's Church of God Anderson. So that's Anderson, Indiana, and actually planning a church, first one in their West Virginia tribe in 35 years. By the way, I'll be at your annual meeting this summer, so I look forward to meeting you Church of God Anderson people. And so if you got a denomination, I was just with the Assemblies of God leadership 10 minutes ago, and they're rich with coaches. They worked hard to do that. Church of God Anderson's kind of new in this place and space. Is there other place to find coaching and connection? Andy, I'll throw it to you and then to Steve.
Yeah. One of the great things about finding a coach is that most of the people who are making a difference in the kingdom of God want to share what they've learned.
Love that.
And so I would say find somebody who is doing what you want to do, and then approach them with specific questions. A lot of the church planters I know, they'll approach a mentoring relationship with asking way too much too quickly. So I would just start with a few questions. And then once you've proven to that person that you're going to use their time well. So you send them questions in advance, ask for 15, 20 minutes of their time, send your learnings on the back end. Then you can approach them for a more defined relationship. That might be 3 months, 6 months. I'd offer to pay them money, even if you find somebody who can offer what you have. But I think it's pretty easy to find people who've done what you want to do and then approach them to learn directly from them.
That's good. Steve, what would you add as far as someone trying to find some coaching?
Yeah, I would say that one of the great things about Andy is Andy has not been shy about asking people for wisdom. And so he'll send letters to people or email somebody, or he'll put a call in and just say, hey, can I have an hour of your time? Can I have 30 minutes of your time? I won't violate it. I would love to pay you $200 for that time. And a lot of these guys would turn down that money, but they would respect the fact that Andy would see the value of their time. And again, to Andy's point, you don't go to a girl on the first date and say, would you marry me? You say, would you like to go out for dinner? And a lot of times they say, hey, would you be my mentor? would you spend an hour with me every week pouring into my life? And the answer is probably going to be no. The other thing I would say is that reading is one of the best ways to be mentored. There's a lot of great wisdom that's out there. There's a lot of good information out there. And some of my greatest mentors I've never met, but I've read every single thing that they've written, and I've learned from them without having to make a big deal about sitting down for a meal.
Love that. And I think it's important to mention that even like resources like this are helpful. We're talking about church planning and more. The Exponential has a whole line of books that you can find easily at Amazon. Click through. Amazon Prime Day starts like moments away, so you can find all kinds of resources there. I co-host a church planning podcast, the New Churches podcast. I mean, there's all kinds of resources to help you find the right connections as well. So again, let me remind you, we're listening to the Exponential Backstage. I'm here with Steve and Andy. Andy Wood is going to be speaking at the Exponential Conference in the Bay Area. You can find information for these at the Exponential site. And also Steve's going to be speaking in Houston as well. And so I want to encourage you as always to connect there. Let's jump into, by the way, Joe, by the way, you can check out Exponential has a whole book section. They're reminding me. Good, thanks, Brooks. Check out Exponential books at exponential.org and they got a section there, resource ebooks. You can go there. For the conferences, go to exponential.org 2018. By the way, Joe, I think again, Steve, I think Joe, I'm not sure Joe likes us. I'm kidding. Joe does. Joe wanted to make sure you understood that they're looking for new pastors who are learning to be ministers. Part of that distinction Andy mentioned is the balance on finding freedom and deciding what part of the church and denomination culture are vital to what we're doing. And I think that we would all agree that you've got to walk through your denomination in a way that's helpful for what you're doing and where you're going. I'm interested, Steve. Where are you trying to find the next Andy Wood? Where are you trying to find others? What does that pipeline look like?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of churches that have got some great intern programs where they're having people come to their church and spend time with their staff and that type of thing. And we're communicating to those people that if you find somebody that you think would be a great church planner, we'd love to meet them. I've got a great guy on my staff by the name of Rick Burge, and all he does is search for and vet future church planners. And it's just like finding a staff member. You typically, it's about relationships. And so we're trying to develop as many relationships as we can. Every year we go to Exponential. We go to several Exponentials every year. And every once in a while, we even go to one of the sessions. But we spend a lot of time walking around the hallway saying, who are you and why are you here? Yeah. What church do you come out of and what's the vision that you have? And so it's really about networking. It's about relationships. The great thing now is we've got 38 guys who we've helped plant churches, and we've got them all looking for, we want them to be hero makers now. We've got them looking for people not only in their churches, but in their networks of influence to say, here's a guy that has got the right stuff that would be worth looking at.
Yeah. Andy, I know that once you went out the Bay Area, you thought, you know what, I'm an inheritor of this Great Commission highway. Someone planted this church, but now that you're in the Bay Area, you're like, I'm going to be a cul-de-sac on the Great Commission Highway. You didn't care about finding any more church planners, right? Is that true?
Oh, thank you for putting me on the spot like that, man. Yeah, absolutely true. We don't want to plant any more churches. We feel like we're the end of the kingdom.
So tell us a little more how you're continuing that Great Commission Highway.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is the perspective. I love how Dave talks in the book about just this multiplication thinking. And if we are, if we're focused on the other churches in our area to say, how can we beat them and be better than them, then that leads to a totally different mindset. But if we focus on the fact that in our area, now Ed, you might correct my stat, but best I can tell, it's 93% unreached with the message of Jesus in the Bay Area. And if our church, by God's grace, if we grew to 50,000 people or something like that, I mean, think about how small of a percentage of the people who are far from God that we would actually be reaching. There's no way that we can even put a dent in the lostness on our own. So that means we are going to need literally hundreds of more life-giving churches to reach our region. So we'd be idiots to feel like or think that we're the end and it's just about our church growing. I mean, we want to see the Bay Area reach with the message of Jesus. We want to see the West Coast reach. We want to see the Northeast reached. And for that to happen is not just us. It's going to take some other church plants. So I think it's a heart attitude. It's a mindset. Now there are times where I have to wrestle through my own pride, my own insecurities, and the fact that, there are times where you plant a church in a neighborhood that you wanted to start a campus. And that's, I have to get over that, certainly, but my heart and desire to see the kingdom expand and reach people who are far from God supersedes my desire for the thing that we're doing.
Well, I want to remind everybody that if you're on Zoom, you can actually leave a question. We can't do that right now on Facebook Live. Though I do want to encourage you, if you're on Facebook Live, to share this resource for others. You can do that by clicking like and share. And so people will know and be aware of what we're doing here, helping to serve church planners through the Exponential Backstage broadcast. So if you're on Zoom, you can ask a question. We only got a couple minutes left, though, so this is your time to put up a question if you'd like to do so. I'm going to ask one more and then see if any can come in. There are dangers with, and I'll throw this to Steve, there are dangers with just saying, I'm going to give you permission. So how do you guardrail? Well, I guess I remember your box, but still, how do you think through this process? How much is too much permission? How much is too little? And how do you know?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, let me just say that Andy lives out what he just said.
Oh, yeah.
Right now, we're planting 4 additional churches in the Bay Area, and he's mentoring those church planners that we're planting there and financially supporting them.
Wow.
Not only has he done that, but he's also financially supported several other churches that we've planted in other parts of the United States. So he's not only giving his wisdom now, but they're actually putting a great portion of their church's budget into some of these roundtables that we have. But to your question, what I would say is that every church needs to have farm teams. In other words, where they don't bet the farm, but they have somebody who can use their gifts and abilities, and there'll be a safe place for them to develop those so that you mitigate the risk to a certain point. If all you have is the major leagues and a guy either can play in the major leagues or he's not even going to be drafted, then you're in trouble. So you got to create, not only within your church, but also within the larger kingdom efforts, you got to create some farm teams where you can allow people to take greater risk.
Good. Andy, let me throw a question to you. It's from Vincent Cordaro. What resources are there for church plants who don't have a sending, supporting church? What would you suggest? Where would they find different kinds of help, not just financial, but different kinds of help? Any suggestions?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier that we do some things with church planters. I started an organization with our executive pastor called Frontline Coaching. And we have a network that we're starting this fall that has resources on launching from scratch. I also do believe Exponential is a great place for that. I think coming to an Exponential conference and just hanging out. And like Steve said, when you're in that networking time, you can find some other great leaders that really can help resource you in the vision.
Yeah, so we'll follow up on that, though, because John Redwine asked the question. Networking seems to be a crucial skill, and we'll make this our last question, but in developing mentors and coaches, can you guys talk some about the primary methods or pointers for networking? What's your game plan when you attend a conference or other resource-rich environment? How do you do that? Go be basic. Go back. Tell me how you do this networking. Start with Andy, then we'll end with Steve.
Okay, so John Redwine, actually the church planter from our church, he's in Asheville, North Carolina. So, and he's doing a great job planting a church there called The Gathering.
The Gathering. I can tell it's not Pentecostal because Pentecostals can't have red wine. But anyway, go right on from there.
Yeah. And actually a really cool story. John Mark's dad was one of my mentors when I was in college. So our relationship went full circle. But getting practical on that. So what I do when I'm at a conference is I usually I'll know who's there. I'll kind of look ahead. I'll try to figure out what leaders, what church planters will be there. And then I'll say, okay, I'm going to try to connect with 4 or 5 people, and I'm just going to find them in the hallway. And when I go up to them, I'm going to have 4 or 5 key questions that I'm going to ask them. And I'm going to basically kind of intuitively figure it out when I get up to them, how much they want to talk to me. So I'll start the conversation. I'll say, hey, I'm Andy Wood. I'm planting a church in the Bay Area. I've heard amazing things about you from this angle, da-da-da-da-da. I'm wondering if I could ask you just a couple of quick questions, and I'll just get right to it. depending on the leader, but most of the time, if it's a really high D focused leader, I'm going to get right to it. And then they'll pretty quickly see if you're taking notes, you're engaged, you ask maybe one or two follow-up questions. They'll see, okay, this leader, they're going to do something with what I have. If I sense that they're open to continued conversation, I'll continue asking a couple more questions. I'll give them a chance to get out of the conversation. I might say one or two things to kind of give them an out. But a lot of times you'll do that, and then the leader might give you like, I got a few more minutes, and then you can keep going if they give you that opportunity. I never want to overstep, though, the amount of time that is available, because what happens is if you honor and respect the time that you're given initially, you'll get more time over time. So it's like back to the girlfriend thing, if you're kind of going up, like,
I think you guys need a new metaphor, because I want to be your girlfriend if you ever call me to mentor you, but I get what you're saying. But it does, and I think it does help, because I'm often asked by people like you are and like Steve is, and I get these emails all the time. Can I get 5 minutes? And no one ever has a 5-minute conversation ever. And so, tell me, if you need 15 minutes, let's do 15 minutes. And if you need 30 minutes of advice, let's do that as well.
Yeah. The other thing too, is you can email people questions that you have. So like I have there's a venture capitalist that I've been learning from here in our area, and I'll mull over a question for a couple weeks that I know he can answer. And I'll just send him the question, and he'll send me back 2 pages of notes that's worth an hour, of he probably spent 20 minutes on the email, and I actually maximized his time and my time to get my question answered. So you can do a lot of stuff via email, text. But I think that the issue really is not there being enough resources available.
Okay.
The issue is initiative, and the issue is the art or the skill of asking for help. Yeah. But once church planters figure it out, there's a plethora of resources.
Good. Steve, last word from you. What would you suggest?
Yeah, well, as you can tell, Andy has the spiritual gift of asking questions.
Yes, he does. I've noticed that.
He really asks, but he thinks through his questions. He says, what can this person help me with? In other words, he's prepared for the conversation. The other thing, don't miss it, he said, and when they start talking, you start taking notes. When I go into a room where I'm coaching a group of folks and there are people who didn't bring pens, or they're not pulling out their phones to type in answers, I'm thinking I'm wasting my time. The other thing I would say is your tendency when you're with someone who's further along than you are is to impress them. And so what you do is you start telling them about your ministry and all that you're doing and your numbers and everything else, and you're wasting precious time trying to impress them. You're not going to impress them. Just go ahead and give up on that and instead garner or reap some of their wisdom.
Yeah, I wrote a whole article on how to get advice, because I had this meeting where this person said exactly what you said, Andy. He said, hey, can I have 30 minutes? I said, sure. So they took 28 minutes telling me stuff that wasn't really helpful to the conversation, and then asked a question at the end, and I just couldn't. I had another meeting. I said, I'm sorry, I don't. And I sat quietly and listened to 28 minutes, but I think it missed out on something that could have been helpful. And again, there's things you need to tell so you get a little context, but that's not the totality of it. So good, such helpful conversation in and around permission giving. And hero making. Thankful for both of you, Steve and Andy. Thank you for your work and for your faithfulness. I want to remind you that you can hear from these leaders at the Exponential regional conferences. That Steve will be at Exponential in Houston, October 24th and 25th. Andy, Exponential regional in the Bay Area. And so I want to encourage you to come. We actually have the graphics now. The graphics are here. So October 22nd and 23rd, and they'll be talking about some of these ideas of permission giving. So then let me encourage you to attend those conferences. As always, you can find more information at exponential.org. I encourage you to go there as well. I'm Ed Stetzer for Andy Wood, for Steve Stroope, and for the whole team at Exponential. Thanks for joining us on Exponential Backstage. Remember, like and share on Facebook. Peace out.